Sometimes the most unexpected visitors bring the answers we've spent a lifetime searching for. For Elizabeth Beth Morgan, that visitor arrived on four tiny hooves during the coldest winter Colorado had seen in decades. The miniature donkey appeared at her cabin door, alone and hungry, miles from any ranch or farm. She fed him, named him Whisper, and figured she'd find his owner come spring. But Whisper had other plans. Every morning he led her into the forest to places she'd never seen yet somehow recognized. Places that stirred memories of her brother who vanished 30 years ago and secrets buried with her family's past. What was this little creature trying to show her? And why now when the mountains held nothing but snow and silence? Beth Morgan had spent 25 years reading the language of the wild. She knew how elk moved through timber in deep snow, could identify a mountain lion's kill site from 100 yards out, and had tracked more black bears than most people would see in 10 lifetimes. Her hands, weathered and capable at 48, wrapped around a chipped ceramic mug of coffee as she stood on the porch of her hand-built cabin, watching first light touch the peaks of the Colorado Rockies. The cabin sat at 9,200 feet, accessible only by a Forest Service road that became impassable from November through April. The main room served as kitchen, library, and living space, with a wood stove salvaged from an abandoned ranger station. Her bedroom was barely larger than the bed itself, but she needed little. A loft held her gear, her files, her records of decades spent in service to creatures that never knew her name. Retirement had been harder than expected. For 25 years, her purpose had been clear: track, observe, protect, document. Now her days stretched with no schedule, no urgent missions. She journaled each morning, recording weather and animal sign out of habit. She split wood, maintained solar panels, and kept her gear field ready, though she had nowhere specific to go. Once a month she drove to Silverton for supplies and called her daughter from the library's payphone. Her cabin had no cell service, and she preferred it that way. Her daughter Olivia lived in Denver, worked as a clinical psychologist, had a 6-year-old daughter of her own. They spoke with the careful politeness of people who'd once been close, but had drifted into separate orbits. Olivia had been 12 when Nathan disappeared, old enough to remember the chaos that followed, but young enough to need a mother who wasn't consumed by grief. Beth had failed at that. She'd thrown herself into work, tracking animals instead of processing loss. By the time she'd surfaced, Olivia had learned to manage without her. The memory of Nathan was a constant ache she'd learned to carry. He'd been 5 years younger, gentle where she was fierce, drawn to poetry while she'd preferred field guides. After his army service in the Gulf War, he'd come home changed, quieter, jumpier, prone to long silences. Their parents hadn't understood PTSD, had treated it as a weakness rather than wound. In October of 1995, Nathan had driven up to these mountains for what he'd called a simple hunting trip. They'd found his truck at a trailhead 3 days later. His rifle was in the cab, his pack was gone, and there was no trail to follow. Search and rescue had combed the area for 2 weeks. They'd found nothing. Her father had never accepted it. He'd spent his final years obsessed with the family's old mining claim, insisting Nathan had been searching for something connected to it. He'd covered maps with notations, filled journals with theories about hidden springs and shifting landmarks. When he died of a heart attack 4 years after Nathan's disappearance, they boxed up his papers and tried to move forward. Beth had carried her guilt like a stone. She was the tracker, the expert, the one who could read sign that others missed. But she'd been in Montana on assignment when Nathan vanished. By the time she'd arrived, any trail had been obliterated by dozens of boots. She'd looked anyway, spending every day off for months hiking those mountains, finding nothing. Her marriage had fallen apart in the aftermath. David couldn't understand her obsession with finding Nathan, couldn't compete with a ghost for her attention. He'd left when Olivia was 5, taking a job in California and starting a new family. Now she lived in solitude by choice, or so she told herself. The cabin was her fortress against the weight of memory. Where are you watching from? Leave a comment below and subscribe for more stories that will touch your heart. The winter had come early and hard. By mid-October, snow had buried the high country, and by November, her access road was drifted shut. But on the morning of December 3rd, something changed. She'd been splitting rounds of beetle kill pine when she'd heard an unfamiliar sound, a bray, high-pitched and insistent. She'd set down her maul and walked around the cabin's north side. And there, standing in knee-deep snow at the edge of her clearing, was a miniature donkey. The creature was perhaps 3 feet tall, shaggy with winter coat, and desperately thin. Its ribs showed through matted brown fur. It was covered in mud, and its mane was tangled with burrs. But its eyes were bright and intelligent, and it showed no fear. It simply stood there, looking at her, and brayed again. Beth approached slowly. The donkey didn't retreat. Up close, she could see it was male, with hooves that needed trimming and a nasty scrape along one flank. Around its neck was a worn leather collar with a small brass bell attached. When the donkey shifted, the bell gave a soft chime. She looked for tracks leading to her cabin, but found only the donkey's own hoof prints from the south. No vehicle tracks, no human footprints, nothing to indicate how this creature had ended up alone at 9,200 feet in December. The nearest ranch was 8 miles down valley, and there were no farms between. No one ran livestock up here in winter. It made no sense. The donkey allowed her to examine him. The scrape on his flank was superficial. He was dehydrated and starving, but otherwise sound. She led him to her equipment shed, cleared a space, and bedded him with pine boughs. She mixed warm water with oats and molasses meant for her own consumption, and watched him eat with methodical focus. Then she hauled water, filled a bucket, and watched him drink nearly 2 gallons. That first night, she checked on him every few hours, expecting him to be gone by morning. He wasn't. She'd named him Whisper on the second day, after his soft brays. She cleaned him up, treating the scrape with antibiotic ointment, working burrs from his mane, and trimming his hooves with a farrier's knife. The brass bell caught her attention. It was handmade with careful engraving partially obscured by tarnish. She cleaned it with vinegar and discovered initials etched into the brass. NM. She'd stared at those letters, her pulse loud. Nathan Morgan. But that was impossible. Thousands of people had those initials. Whisper recovered quickly. Within a week, he was alert and had even put on weight. Beth had accepted that she'd keep him until spring. She'd fashioned a better shelter, laid an extra feed, and established a routine. Every morning, she'd let him out to walk around the clearing, and every evening, she'd bring him back before dark. But on December 10th, Whisper refused to return to the shed. Instead, he walked to the trailhead and stopped, looking back expectantly. She tried to lead him back. He'd refused, planting his hooves and braying softly. Then he'd taken a few steps down the trail and looked back again. The message was unmistakable. Follow me. Beth had stood in the cold, debating. She'd seen animals display intelligence, but this felt different. This felt purposeful. Against her better judgment, she'd dressed for a winter hike and followed the small donkey into the forest. Whisper led her through timber and across frozen meadows. He moved with confidence, never hesitating at intersections, never deviating from whatever route he'd chosen. After 2 hours, he stopped at a frozen waterfall in a small clearing Beth didn't recognize. She checked her GPS, but the location meant nothing to her. It wasn't on any trail she'd mapped. Yet standing there, she felt a strange sensation. Not quite déjà vu, but a whisper of familiarity, as though she'd been here before. There was something else too. The acoustics were wrong. Her footsteps echoed strangely, and the wind sounds seemed to come from multiple directions. The light had an unusual quality, more golden than winter sun. Whisper pawed at the snow. Beth knelt to investigate and found something half buried. A brass compass. Her father's compass, the one he'd dented while rappelling years ago. She'd seen that compass 1,000 times. After his death, it had disappeared. They'd assumed someone had cleaned out his effects and discarded it. But here it was, lying beneath snow, as though waiting. When she opened the case, the needle spun erratically, refusing to settle on north. She checked her own compass. It worked fine. But her father's compass seemed to pull northwest, deeper into the mountains. That night, Beth examined Whisper's bell more carefully. Inside were tiny numbers etched along the interior rim. Coordinates, precise to the second. She plotted them on her map. They indicated a location 8 miles northwest, in a remote basin she'd surveyed once, years ago. Beth looked out at the equipment shed. Whatever Whisper was, whatever impossible thing was happening, she knew she would follow where he led. For the next week, Whisper established a pattern. Each dawn, he would wait until Beth followed. Each time, he led her to a different location. Each time, she felt that same unsettling twinge of recognition. At the fourth site, she found Nathan's pocket knife, the one she'd given him for his 16th birthday, with his initials engraved, the knife that should have been with him when he disappeared. But here it was, looking barely aged after 30 years. The blade was still sharp, the brass fittings uncorroded, the handle intact. Beth sat in the snow, the knife clutched in her fist as her mind raced through possibilities. Someone had planted it. Someone had found it years ago and dropped it here. It wasn't really Nathan's knife, just an identical model. But each explanation crumbled. She knew this knife, knew every scratch on the handle. This was Nathan's. Whisper stood beside her, watching with those intelligent dark eyes. "What are you showing me?" At the seventh location, Beth found a fragment of military-issue canteen. Nathan's canteen from his service years. Inside was a Ziploc bag containing dried herb. Beth photographed everything before carefully extracting the bag. The plant looked like sage, but was a variety she didn't immediately recognize. She decided to make a call. After Whisper's daily trek, she hiked to her truck to use her satellite phone. She called Dr. Marcus Hayes, a retired anthropology professor she'd worked with near indigenous sites. "Beth Morgan," he'd answered warmly. "Thought you'd hibernated for the winter. Marcus, I need your expertise. Off the record." She described the plant material, avoiding how she'd obtained it. She texted photos. "That's white sage, Salvia apiana. The preparation is specific. That's ceremonial, used in indigenous cleansing rituals, vision quests, spiritual preparation. How old? Maybe 30 years. Where did you find this?" The Ute people recognize certain locations as thin places, spots where the boundary between worlds is permeable, springs, caves, certain peaks. They'd prepare with fasting, prayer, and herbs like the sage before entering those spaces. Why? Seeking guidance, healing, transformation. Vision quests were serious undertakings. Beth had looked over the mountains, the phone cold against her ear. If someone was preparing for that kind of experience, what would you expect to find? Often there would be offerings, stones, tobacco, cornmeal, sometimes markers indicating sacred space, and usually a specific destination, a spring, a cave, somewhere significant. That evening, Beth made another difficult call, to Olivia. Unexpected calls usually meant bad news. "Mom," concern immediate in her voice, "is everything okay?" "I'm fine, but I need to talk about something important." She told Olivia everything. The donkey, the bell, the compass, the knife, the canteen, the coordinates. She explained her theory about thin places. The silence that followed was long. "Mom, I'm worried about you. Winter isolation affects judgment. I know how it sounds. Because it sounds like you've constructed a fantasy to avoid accepting that Uncle Nathan died 30 years ago. I've documented everything. If I'm delusional, I'm doing it with remarkable consistency. Or you're finding what you want to find. Confirmation bias. I want you to come up here. See for yourself." Olivia's sigh carried the weight of their complicated relationship. "Give me 3 days." Olivia arrived 3 days later, her SUV navigating the terrible road. She emerged bundled in expensive winter gear, her face tight with worry. Beth showed her everything: the artifacts, journal entries, maps, photographs. Then she took her to meet Whisper. The donkey looked up calmly as they entered. Olivia stopped in the doorway. "That's really a miniature donkey at 9,200 feet in winter." Olivia approached slowly. When she reached out, Whisper placed his head in her palm. The brass bell rang softly. She looked at the bell, saw the engraving, and her breath caught. NM, 1995. Uncle Nathan's initials, the year he disappeared. Olivia's skepticism cracked. "This isn't possible." "I know, but it's happening." They'd gone back to the cabin, and Olivia read her grandfather's journals while Beth made dinner. He really believed Uncle Nathan was alive somewhere. He was trying to save him. "And you think he was right?" "I think something extraordinary is happening. I don't know if Nathan could possibly be alive, but I can't walk away without finding out." "What's the next step?" "We've been to 8 locations. There are 2 more. The final one should be the waterfall at these coordinates." She tapped the bell. "You don't have to come." "Yes, I do. If there's even a chance this is real, I'm not letting you do it alone." They'd sat in lamplight, united by shared grief and impossible hope. Outside, Whisper brayed softly, the sound carrying like a promise. At dawn, all 3 set out for the final location. The sky promised more snow and the temperature had dropped overnight. A storm was coming. Whisper led them northwest, deeper into the mountains. The terrain grew steeper, the forest thinning near tree line. The wind cut through their layers, their breath hard in the thin air. After 3 hours, they reached a frozen waterfall, perhaps 100 feet high. The ice formations were spectacular, blue-white in winter light. "It's beautiful," Olivia murmured, "but I don't see anything unusual." Beth approached slowly. Something about the ice was strange. It refracted light differently, creating prismatic effects where sun touched it. "Look at the rock face behind the ice." Behind the ice, visible through crystalline formations, were symbols carved into the granite, spirals and lines, geometric patterns unlike anything Beth had seen outside anthropology textbooks. "They're only visible from this angle," Olivia said. "From any other direction, they'd be hidden." Beth pulled out her father's journal and found a sketch of symbols he claimed to have seen in a dream. They matched the carvings exactly. "He saw these before he died." Whisper pawed the snow at the waterfall's base. Beth found a flat stone with a depression in its center, clearly shaped by human hands, a natural altar. She cleared it carefully, revealing more symbols. Following her father's instructions, Beth prepared the final offering: a buckskin pouch filled with soil from her cabin clearing, the family photograph Olivia had brought, sage from Nathan's canteen, and a lock of her own hair. Olivia added her grandfather's pocket watch, a drawing from her daughter, a note to the uncle she barely remembered. "We're all here," she said softly. "Everyone who loves him." Beth placed the pouch on the stone. Then, feeling foolish but determined, she spoke aloud. "Nathan Morgan, if you're waiting somewhere, we're here. We followed your path. We're ready to bring you home." Her voice echoed strangely, multiplying and harmonizing. Olivia gripped her hand tightly. Nothing happened except the sound of breathing and distant wind. Then Whisper's bell began to ring. Not from movement, the donkey stood still, but the bell rang with a clear sound that grew louder and more insistent. Beth removed the bell from Whisper's collar and placed it at the center of the stone altar. The ringing intensified, resonating in her chest, in her bones. And then the ice cracked. Not breaking, but shifting, the sound like distant thunder. Water began to flow behind the frozen curtain, glowing with pale blue-green luminescence. The carved symbols lit up one by one, pulsing with the same ethereal light. Whisper walked directly toward the ice. Beth reached out to stop him, but Olivia gripped her arm. "Let him go." The donkey walked into the waterfall and vanished, not behind it, but into it, as though the ice were a doorway. Beth's rational mind screamed impossibility, but her heart knew what she was seeing. Behind the flowing water, instead of solid rock, There was a passage filled with soft golden light. Mom, it's real. What do we do? Beth looked at her daughter, this woman who'd driven through winter roads and suspended disbelief because family mattered more than certainty. We go through, together. Together they stepped forward toward the impossible waterfall. The water was warm where it touched Beth's face, flowing in dreamlike slow cascade. It wasn't moving according to normal physics, flowing sideways and upward as much as down. She stepped through the water, pulling Olivia with her. The passage was both physical tunnel and something else. The walls shifted between stone and light. Distance felt variable. They walked for what seemed like hours and seconds simultaneously. Sound was muffled, with footsteps echoing from impossible directions. Beth gripped her daughter's hand, the only solid thing in a space not quite real. And then the passage opened. They emerged into a small valley that should not exist. It was perhaps half a mile across, ringed by mountains both solid and translucent. The sky above was blue, but a shade unlike any Beth had seen, deeper and somehow closer. The air was warm, spring gentle, defying the winter they'd left behind. At the center was a spring emerging from living granite, water so clear it looked like liquid light. The pool was perfectly circular, surrounded by impossibly green grass and vivid wildflowers. And there, sitting on a boulder beside the spring, whittling a piece of wood with a familiar knife, was Nathan. He looked up at their footsteps. For a moment he stared in disbelief. Then a smile broke across his face, pure joy Beth hadn't seen since before the war. "Took you long enough, Beth," he said, his voice exactly as she remembered, gentle, slightly rough, with a hint of amusement. Beth tried to speak but couldn't. Her throat closed. Her eyes filled with tears. She stood shaking, looking at her brother who'd been dead for 30 years, now sitting yards away, alive and whole. Nathan stood. He'd aged, but not as he should have. He looked mid-40s, weathered but healthy. His face still held its gentle quality, but the haunted look was gone. His eyes were clear in a way they'd never been after the war. He stepped forward, and Beth stumbled toward him. They collided in an embrace, both crying, 30 years of grief pouring out in shaking sobs. He smelled like pine smoke and clean water. His hand on her back was the same comforting touch from childhood. "I'm sorry," he whispered. "I didn't mean to leave you all for so long. Time doesn't work the same here. It's only been 8 months for me, but I knew decades were passing out there. I knew what it would do to you all. You're alive. I'm alive. That's all that matters." They held each other a long time. Then Nathan noticed Olivia standing a few feet away, her face shocked and tear-streaked. He looked at his niece, the girl who'd been 12 when he disappeared, now a woman. "Olivia, little Liv, you missed my wedding," she said, half laughing, half crying, "and Sophie's birth, and 30 years of birthdays." "I know. I'm sorry." He opened his arms and Olivia stepped into them. They stood together, a family reassembling after 3 decades of absence. If you're still with me, share your thoughts in the comments and subscribe for more stories like this. Whisper was there, standing near the spring, but less physical now, more luminous, as though his true nature showed through the donkey form. "He volunteered to come get you," Nathan said. "The spring has a kind of consciousness. When I was ready to leave, ready to face the world again, I asked for a way to send a message." Whisper appeared the next day. "Why the elaborate trail?" Beth asked. "This place doesn't work through coercion. You had to follow the trail willingly, had to believe enough to take each step. He gave you a trail you could follow." "What is this place, Nathan?" "Really?" They settled on the soft grass. Nathan explained carefully. "It's a thin place, where time and space work differently, where the boundary between the physical and spiritual is permeable. When I came here, running from PTSD I couldn't handle anymore, I found peace, silence from the war in my head, a place to process without the noise of the regular world. But you aged, Olivia said. Time here is slower, not stopped, Nathan explained. For every month I experienced, maybe 3 years passed out there. I knew Dad was looking for me. I tried to send messages, but the connection was weak. I felt it when he passed. The grief nearly pulled me back. But I wasn't ready yet. I was still healing. What about Mom? Beth asked. I felt that too. Every death, every major event echoed through somehow, like distant music. And finally I realized I was done healing. I was ready to go home, but I needed help from outside. He looked at Beth with gratitude. You did it. You followed the trail. You believed the impossible. You opened the door. Nathan walked to a small shelter and returned with a walking stick, beautifully carved with intricate patterns. I made this for you. Keep it, remember, and know that healing is possible even when it seems impossible. Then he filled a canteen with the luminous water, sealed it, and stood. We need to go soon. The passage stays open briefly. And I need to thank this place before I leave. It saved my life, gave me reason to keep living when I had none. He knelt, speaking words Beth couldn't hear, his hand on the earth beside the spring. When he stood, he looked peaceful and ready. Time to go home. The valley shimmered as they walked toward the passage. At the entrance, Nathan looked back one final time, hand pressed to his heart, before leading them into the shifting space between worlds. When they emerged through the waterfall, it was into deep cold and fading light. They stood in snow, breath steaming, completely, impossibly alive. The waterfall had frozen again, the passage closed, and they were back in the ordinary world where dead men didn't return. Except Nathan was here, shivering in clothes meant for spring. Olivia draped her parka over his shoulders. They started down, moving quickly. Nathan struggled with the cold, and Beth and Olivia supported him between them. Halfway down, Olivia called a friend in the search and rescue. We need extraction. 3 adults, all mobile but exhausted. They met the snowcat at the roadhead as darkness fell. The operator took one look at Nathan and immediately wrapped him in emergency blankets. He asked no questions beyond confirming they were unhurt, then transported them to Olivia's car. 6 months later, Beth stood watching the summer sunset paint the mountains gold. The legal process of resurrecting Nathan had been challenging. Medical examinations revealed him to be impossibly healthy for his age, with the bone density of a much younger man. Nathan had moved to Durango, working at a veterans center helping others with PTSD. His story, the sanitized version, resonated deeply. A soldier who'd walked away and found healing. He never mentioned the spring or supernatural intervention, but those he counseled sensed something in him, a peace earned through genuine suffering. Olivia visited monthly now, bringing Sophie to spend time with her grandmother and great-uncle. The generations hiked together, told stories, and built relationships that 3 decades of absence had delayed. Beth felt peace she'd never thought possible again. On her mantle, the canteen sat beside the brass bell. The water inside never evaporated. It glowed faintly in darkness, a reminder that some healings transcend normal laws. And sometimes, when Beth hiked alone in the high country, she would find small hoof prints that led nowhere and vanished at forest edge. Some guides never truly leave. Some mysteries don't need solving, only honoring. Some trails lead to places maps can never show. But the greatest mystery might be how love persists across decades, across realities, across the boundaries we create. How it waits, patient and unyielding, for the moment when we're ready to follow where it leads.